The air in Beijing in the spring of 2018 didn't just feel heavy, it felt recorded dash. Every breath, every shadow, every casual glance was metabolized by the state apparatus and stored in some frigid server farm outside the Fourth Ring Road. My cover was impeccable. Eleanor Vance, a consultant for high-end Western art acquisition, specializing in ancient Chinese calligraphy. This gave me legitimate access to the high-roller private auctions and, crucially, to the specific, quiet corridors near the Forbidden City where the old money and the deep secrets mingled. The mission code name was Dragonfly. The asset, a disillusioned technical advisor in the Ministry of State Security's cryptography division, was Lazarus. What he offered wasn't just data, it was the entire schematics for their new generation of quantum-resistant communication systems, the Ghost Network, potentially rendering decades of Western signals intelligence obsolete. Its strategic value was easily north of $100 million, maybe even $1 trillion in long-term strategic advantage. Lazarus had signaled the transfer via a highly specialized protocol, a specific, arcane error message appearing on a public government website footer, visible only to those looking for it. The drop was set for 72 hours hence. The tension wasn't just physical, it was cerebral. I walked the streets with the awareness that if a pedestrian tripped, if a bicyclist swerved, or if a dog barked 1 second too early, it wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. I wore clothing that absorbed thermal signature and walked precise routes mapped to avoid the high-definition lenses fixed on the traffic lights. My paranoia wasn't a flaw, it was my operational doctrine. I knew the familiar faces of my persistent surveillance team, the Goldfish, 3 dedicated MSS officers who followed me on rotating shifts. They were predictable, almost comforting in their routine incompetence. But for a dead drop this critical, I knew the amateurs would be pulled, replaced by the cleaners, the professional hunters I had thankfully only heard about in warnings. The preparation was agonizing. Cleaning my apartment of all trace elements, recalibrating the pressure sensor under the rug, adjusting the dust motes on the windowsill, all tiny indicators that would tell me if I'd been searched in my absence. The real danger wasn't being caught doing the drop. It was being identified as the operative before the drop, making the transfer nothing more than the final piece of evidence in a neatly constructed case against me. Every minute was a calculation of risk versus return, measured in nanoseconds. The secret wasn't delivered on a flash drive. That was amateur hour. It was contained on a sliver of specialized memory, nicknamed the Dragonfly chip, no larger than a grain of rice, encased in a ceramic composite designed to survive extreme heat and pressure tests. My job was to fuse it into the antique silk scroll, a genuine Ming Dynasty calligraphy fragment I had purchased legally for my cover, depicting a mountain landscape. The scroll was the perfect vector, valuable enough to draw attention, yet common enough in the Beijing art scene to raise no suspicion. The fusion required a sterile environment and specific tools. Working in my safe flat near the Drum Tower, a secure bubble accessed only via a 5-point protocol involving randomized transit methods, I spent 4 hours surgically dissecting the scroll. I used microsolder and specialized adhesive to tuck the chip into the core of the winding spindle, hiding it beneath the intricately carved jade finial. The scroll was then re-rolled and lightly treated with a mixture of authentic dust and antique preservation oils to restore the centuries-old patina. The process demanded absolute focus. The temperature of the apartment had to be kept artificially low to control sweat contamination, and I worked under blue light to spot microscopic irregularities. While my hands performed the delicate mechanics, my mind raced through the logistics of the dead drop. The transfer window was narrow, 10:45 p.m. on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, coinciding with the peak of the public lantern release near the Forbidden City. This provided maximum noise, maximum light distraction, and maximum crowd density, a chaos amplifier that could obscure a 3-second action. The sheer volume of people would overwhelm some camera systems, but it also increased the statistical probability of accidental contact, of a bump or an unlucky glance from an alert plainclothes officer. The antique scroll was placed inside a high-quality, generic brown paper tube, disguised as a recent auction purchase. This simple tube contained the fate of Western intelligence for the next decade. I rehearsed the sequence in my mind, synchronizing my breathing with the required actions. 3 steps left, 1 pivot, feign adjustment of the shoulder bag, release the pressure clip, 2-second descent. Perfect execution meant survival. Imperfection meant the end of Eleanor Vance and a lifetime spent in a maximum security black site. Reconnaissance of the drop zone was everything. My cover allowed me to visit the areas around the Meridian Gate, woman, of the Forbidden City repeatedly, claiming to study the historical architecture for an upcoming lecture series. The dead drop location had been selected months prior, a small, low-lying granite aperture, originally part of the ancient drainage system, located exactly 7 meters east of a permanent steamed bun vendor stall. It was obscured from the main security corridor by the vendor's heavy cart and a large, poorly placed commemorative trash bin. The aperture was just wide enough for the scroll tube to slide in and disappear into the dry culvert below, where the receiving agent would retrieve it later via a complex fishing rod mechanism. My pre-run had to be undetectable. I mapped the optical lines of sight, LOS, from every fixed camera, using a high-sensitivity sensor disguised as a wristwatch. There were 14 distinct high-definition cameras covering the zone, plus the rotating panoramic lens atop the Ministry of Culture building. Crucially, I identified the blind spot, a precise 3.1-second window created when the panoramic camera sweeps past the ministry's main flagpole and the vendor momentarily leans down to adjust his propane tank. I walked the path repeatedly, measuring my steps, calibrating my speed to the second. I didn't carry the package, only a similar weighted tube, training my muscles for the movement. The true danger lay not in the fixed cameras, but in the mobile surveillance, the human eyes. I profiled the security presence, the uniformed guards, the conspicuous plainclothes officers managing the crowd flow, and the subtle, often ignored figures, the elderly couple arguing over tourist photos, the teenage couple sharing street food, the sanitation worker wiping a bench too slowly. These were the true sensors. I utilized the drift technique, never moving in a straight line, always changing pace, mimicking the natural, aimless wanderings of a tourist, stopping to tie my shoe at crucial junctions to observe reflection in puddles or shop windows. Each observation reinforced the paranoia. Beijing wasn't just monitored, it was listening dash. The city was a living, breathing acoustic sensor, and any deviation from pedestrian normalcy would be instantly flagged by the algorithms predicting suspicious behavior. The memory of the drop path was etched into my hippocampus, a perfect mental map overlaid with LOS vectors and known threat clusters. Failure to maintain the rhythm meant death. 70 minutes before the drop, the operational equilibrium shattered. I was making my final approach, blending into the surging crowd of festival goers near the National Museum, when I realized the goldfish were gone. Their typical, sluggish rhythm, the overly casual cigarette break, the distinct cut of their suits, all absent. Instead, I sensed a different pressure, a cold, focused intelligence that pricked the hairs on my neck. I caught a fleeting glimpse in the polished surface of a passing tour bus, a man wearing immaculate white gloves, standing absolutely still amidst the surging human tide. He wasn't watching the crowd, he was watching the spaces between the people. These were the white gloves. They were Ministry Level 8, the hunters, the operatives trained by former Stasi experts in non-optical tracking and psychological profiling. They didn't rely on cameras. They relied on minute behavioral anomalies. My stomach clenched. Protocol required abortion if the surveillance posture changed radically, but Lazarus had risked everything for the signal. There would be no second chance at this dataset. I had to proceed, but the planned sequence was obsolete. The white gloves wouldn't fall for the simple, feigned injury distraction I had prepared. I needed a high-fidelity, high-chaos event. I veered sharply into a small market street selling porcelain trinkets. I had to create a distraction large enough to draw the attention of every eye, fixed and mobile, for exactly 3 seconds. I grabbed a fistful of counterfeit RMB from a hidden pouch, currency I had intentionally tainted with a high-strength, non-toxic irritant powder. My new plan: The moment I reached the vendor stall, I would deploy the irritant and simultaneously stage a massive, localized scene of distress. It was high risk because it drew unwanted security attention, but necessary to blind the white gloves' hyper-alert senses. They tracked the pattern. I had to obliterate the pattern entirely. I felt the pressure increasing. The white gloves were closing the gap, maintaining an impossible distance, yet constantly present. I could almost hear their breathing over the roar of the crowd. The silent, suffocating efficiency of their pursuit was a psychological weapon designed to force a mistake. I adjusted the paper tube containing the priceless scroll, feeling the faint, solid outline of the microchip against the silk. Everything hinged on the next 10 minutes and whether my ability to generate localized entropy could overcome their predictive surveillance algorithms. The designated time arrived, 10:45 p.m. The sky above the Forbidden City was awash of orange and red from the floating lanterns, a beautiful, deadly light show. The air was thick with the smell of sweet pastries, burning oil, and the faint, metallic scent of ozone from the overworked streetlights. I approached the steamed bun vendor, my heart hammering a chaotic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. The white gloves were closing in. I saw one, the man from the bus reflection, position himself near a large bronze lion statue, adopting the perfect, casual tourist leaning on railing stance. I executed the new sequence. I bumped sharply into a young woman carrying a tray of iced tea, sending the cups shattering onto the pavement with a loud crash. Simultaneously, I reached into my pouch, gripping the crumpled, treated RMB. As the woman shouted in surprise and the vendor turned to mediate, I tossed the powder-laced money high into the air, yelling in flawless Mandarin, "Thief!" He stole my passport. The powder disseminated instantly, causing several nearby individuals to cough violently and rub their eyes. The resulting localized chaos was immediate and absolute. While all eyes, including the crucial panoramic camera, swiveled toward the robbery and the distressed coughing fits, I pivoted. My left shoulder bag acted as a shield. The paper tube slipped from its specially magnetized clip. I knelt quickly, feigning concern for the tea spill, and in that 2.8-second window, guided the tube perfectly into the dark maw of the drainage aperture near the propane tank. It slid silently down, disappearing into the culvert. The microchip carrying the secrets was now deposited. Exfiltration began immediately. The goal now was to become invisible again, to dissipate the chaos I had just created before security focused on me. I apologized profusely to the tea vendor, handed the shocked woman a fresh bill, untainted, and walked, maintaining a deliberate pace that was neither panicked nor overly relaxed. I felt the adrenaline surge attempting to seize control, but I suppressed it ruthlessly, maintaining the mask of the mildly embarrassed, wealthy tourist. The white gloves, temporarily thrown by the magnitude of the distraction, were reforming their geometry behind me. They knew I was involved in the sudden surge of disruption, but did they know? Why dash? I was in the kill zone, and the game had just entered its most brutal phase. My prearranged exfiltration signal was designed to confirm the successful drop and initiate the next phase of extraction. It required a non-verbal, non-digital exchange with a designated surveillance asset, the handler assigned to collect the scroll, codenamed the Courier. The exchange point was a kiosk selling tonghalu, candied fruit skewers, precisely 300 meters from the drop site. If the scroll was safely retrieved, the courier would purchase a specific selection, 3 hawthorns, followed by a strawberry, followed by a kiwi, a sequence unique to our protocol. My job was simple: purchase an identical skewer combination. The moment I reached the kiosk, I felt the second wave of cold dread. The courier, disguised as a heavily bundled elderly woman, was already there. She was not purchasing the signaling sequence. She was frozen, her hand hovering over a plain sugar apple skewer. As my eyes met hers, she performed a small, almost imperceptible gesture, a barely visible twitch of her left index finger, a sign meaning compromise. Abandon. The drop site was compromised, meaning either Lazarus had been intercepted before he could signal safe passage, Or, more terrifyingly, the white gloves had been anticipating the exact method of extraction. I did not make eye contact again. I bought a standard pineapple skewer, paid with a crisp 20 RMB note, and walked away immediately, consuming the sugary treat to project normalcy. The scroll was deposited, but the entire retrieval architecture had failed. The fact that the courier was still at the kiosk, using the abandoned signal rather than vanishing, suggested she might be under observation or, worse, already detained and operating under duress. My mission flipped from exfiltration to immediate survival. The white gloves knew the drop had occurred near the vendor stall. They were likely already sweeping the area. They would quickly realize the distraction was artificial. I was now a priority target in a crowded metropolis designed to funnel movement. I had less than 5 minutes before they locked down the immediate exits. I had to disappear into the labyrinth. The moment I received the abandoned signal, I broke protocol and abandoned the planned exfiltration route, which relied on public transit and crowded shopping centers. I sprinted toward the narrow, twisting warren of the Dashilon Hutongs, the ancient alleyways characterized by low, shadowed walls and confusing geometry. This was my terrain. I had memorized these alleys during my initial phase of operational mapping, viewing them as both a trap and a sanctuary. The sheer density and lack of centralized lighting offered a temporary reprieve from optical surveillance. As I plunged into the first alley, I heard the subtle increase in noise behind me. Not sirens, but the rapid, purposeful footfalls of highly trained pursuers. The white gloves were moving fast, confident that the Hutongs, lacking clear escape routes, would simply corner me. I used every piece of environmental knowledge. I utilized the rat run, hugging the walls, moving diagonally across T-junctions to break loose, and employing small, localized obstacles. I kicked over a stack of empty beverage crates outside a residential door, a loud, short burst of noise that masked my directional change. I then vaulted a low, crumbling wall into a small, domestic courtyard, ignoring the yelps of a startled dog. I didn't stop to rest. I only shifted my direction. The critical move was entering a dried-out, abandoned well enclosure near a tailor shop. I held my breath, flattening myself against a cold, damp stone, hearing the synchronized, methodical search pattern of the white gloves sweeping the alley I had just left. Their voices were low, precise, and chillingly devoid of emotion. They were using acoustics to track my displacement. To counter this, I executed the ghost echo. Using a cheap plastic toy I had concealed in my sleeve, I flicked it off a corrugated metal roof 30 meters to my right. The sharp metallic clang drew their attention just long enough for me to slip out of the well enclosure and dive into a narrow side passage leading toward the old canal. The physical exertion was immense, but the adrenaline fueled the flight. I was a ghost moving through a city of ancestors, knowing that my next mistake would be the last moment of my freedom. I had gained distance, but distance wasn't safety. I needed information. Had the scroll been retrieved? Was the courier compromised, or merely cautious? Was Lazarus dead, or just captured? The information was critical to determining my escape vector. If the intelligence was still loose, I might have to risk re-entering the danger zone. If it was safe, my priority was immediate exfiltration. Traditional comms were out. Any digital trace would be instantly geolocated and used to triangulate my position. I needed a ghost in the machine. I located the silent node, a secured Wi-Fi access point I had installed months ago, disguised as the public network for a late-night bubble tea shop 3 blocks west of my current location. The node was equipped with a custom-built directional antenna capable of receiving a highly compressed, pre-encrypted burst transmission from a specific, disposable low-power device. I was 2 blocks away, but I couldn't risk going closer. I ducked into a dilapidated public restroom, the stench of disinfectant and decay temporarily overwhelming the sensory input of the chase. I pulled a specialized cricket device from the lining of my coat, a miniature, low-emission radio burst transmitter. I had 15 seconds to transmit the query, a simple, binary code requesting status update on the Dragonfly, package, and asset Lazarus. I aimed the cricket toward the bubble tea shop and triggered the sequence. The burst was instantaneous, but the silence following the transmission was agonizingly loud. I knew the moment that signal hit the atmosphere, the MSS monitoring grid would register a microspike in localized, non-standard radio frequency. They would already be tracing the origin point. I didn't wait for the reply. I ditched the cricket into the septic tank and immediately moved. My only hope was that the white gloves were still fixated on the Hudong sweep, giving the signal time to travel and the return message time to reach my receiver, a specialized, encrypted text-to-speech module hidden inside my earring. This was the highest risk phase, sacrificing digital silence for critical intelligence. If I stayed silent, I died uninformed. If I transmitted, I risked exposing the entire clandestine comms architecture. The wait for the reply was an eternity compressed into 2 blocks of swift, calculated movement toward the canal lock. Then, the faint, synthesized whisper in my ear. Dragonfly secured. 23:11 hours. Status L, unknown. Exfil now. Relief, sharp and painful, flooded my system. The $100 million secret was safe. The courier, despite the terrifying pressure, had managed to retrieve the scroll during the brief, 3-second window of my distraction and escape the net before the white gloves sealed the area. Lazarus was a casualty, but the mission objective was achieved. Now, the final sequence, getting out of the capital. I reached the designated emergency extraction point, a seemingly derelict industrial pier used for hauling construction materials off the canal. I used a specialized ultrasonic key to open a hidden steel locker beneath a discarded coil of rope. Inside, I found the ghost phone, a simple, non-traceable satellite burner activated only for exfiltration, and a secondary, low-profile exit passport under a different alias. Dr. Evelyn Chen, a petrochemical engineer bound for Southeast Asia. I activated the ghost phone and sent a single, coded burst transmission to the extraction team operating 20 kilometers downriver. Phoenix rising. ETA 40 minutes. I shed the Eleanor Vance persona quickly. The expensive coat, the distinctive leather shoes, the jewelry, all dumped into a weighted plastic bag and dropped into the oily canal water. I changed into the utilitarian clothes found in the locker. Dark trousers, a simple gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. I was now Dr. Chen. The change was more than clothes. It was a shift in posture, gait, and mindset. I moved with the precise, methodical focus of an engineer, not the fluid, aimless wanderings of an art consultant. I used a low-emission bicycle provided at the site, riding toward the designated river meeting point. I knew the white gloves would now be deploying facial recognition software across every transportation hub. The bike provided anonymity and speed, allowing me to stick to small service roads. The sense of being hunted did not dissipate. It intensified. They knew I was out there. They just didn't know which ghost they were chasing. 48 hours later, I landed in Taipei under heavy CIA protection, the Dragonfly chip already being analyzed by SIGINT specialists. The intelligence was revolutionary, providing the West with a critical advantage in the digital arms race. But the victory felt hollow. Sitting in a secure debriefing center, the sharp edges of my operational paranoia refused to soften. I had escaped Beijing, but Beijing had etched itself onto my soul. The cost of the $100 million secret was the likely fate of Lazarus, a brave man who chose conscience over regime loyalty. The reports were vague. He vanished shortly after the transfer signal was sent, swallowed by the immense security structure he had tried to expose. The efficiency of the white gloves was the most disturbing takeaway. Their quick replacement of the goldfish, their ability to anticipate the extraction protocol, and their speed in locking down the drop zone indicated a fundamental shift in MSS operational capability. Their surveillance was no longer reactive, it was becoming predictive, utilizing behavioral modeling and massive data aggregation to foresee deviations. The fear wasn't the physical capture, it was the psychological dread that they already knew who I was, where I came from, and what I was going to do next. They were just waiting for the most strategically advantageous moment to pull the string. I looked out the window at the relative freedom of Taipei's streets, but the ingrained reflexes of the double life persisted. I instinctively checked the rearview mirror, track the trajectory of a passing delivery vehicle, and analyze the reflection in the glass for subtle, unwanted shadows. I had delivered the priceless intelligence, saving countless resources and potentially billions in defense spending, but the silence of the ghost network and the eyes of the white gloves remained with me. They had lost the data, but they had gained a terrifying lesson in counterintelligence. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that they had learned my new face, too. The game was over, but the surveillance never ends. It just changes cities.